Here you go.
Okay. And
Hi,
Colin's here.
you.
Okay, we've got a fabulous audience already. And James, I'm gonna, oh, got it. So we don't have any extra noise in the outside. Everyone, I will launch in, and as people join, we will let them in. But for now, you guys know how we work here. I've asked Hugh to please not read the chat, but I will send him anything if you want to say something to him after the call. But if you do have questions, please put them in the chat box and I will ask it through during the call at a good time. I'd like to introduce our guest today. I'm a massive, massive fan, and mostly because he's the only thing I actually find joy in on LinkedIn. LinkedIn reminds me too much of corporations and the businessy world, and so I ran across Hugh's posts, and it spoke to my heart. And
Aw.
I have got to meet this guy. So I sent him a cheeky email, and I am now excited to say that we get to delve into the mind of Hugh P. Klitzke. Hello, Hugh.
Way in advance. I mean, like you are so on it. You know, you've got like 4 or 5 months in advance you booked this out. I'm
Yes,
just so
yes.
impressed.
Thank you very much. Um, yes, that's sometimes people forget they were actually booked out, and I'm like, hello, remember me? But it's always worth it once the call hits. And what really, really struck me, first of all, you guys, if you get a chance, check out Hugh's website. It's great. There's videos. I'm sitting there watching the little videos clips on his website like it's a movie, like scrolling through Hugh's website. And the thing that really strikes me the most, I've got to say, is I did voiceover before I became an audiobook narrator. And I think I err on the side of conversational. And my style in narrating audiobooks, I think I err on the side of conversational, which some people don't like. And I get the feeling a lot of the time that I should change, that I'm being too much. And
The
when
market
you
telling
say
you that?
conversational, I want to hear what you mean by it. I want to delve into what a conversational read is. And
Well, is the market telling you that you're too conversational, or are you telling yourself that, or are producers telling you that, or
nobody has told me that, so I think
okay,
it's me telling myself. I
okay,
listen, you listen. I've done like 250 books later, so you just get on with the work anyway, but
oh yeah,
you listen, but you still are aware of what other people are booking and what jobs you don't get booked for and what jobs you do get booked for.
right,
And in particular with nonfiction,
okay,
they either love me or they hate me. And there's nothing
okay.
I can do about that in life. They either love me or hate me. But I'm wondering how that applies to voiceover because I think there could be a good something we can learn as audiobook narrators from the bend toward conversational read and voiceover. You work with actors, don't you?
Well, the first thing I'd say, I mean, yes, but that's not all who I work with for sure.
Okay.
I mean, because I came up in an agency, they were signed actors who also did voiceover as like part of their careers. Now there
You were
were also
casting, weren't you?
voiceover. I was a actually a booth director.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that's where like the big numbers about the numbers of auditions that I've directed. My responsibility was never actually to actually make decisions about who's going to get brought in to do things. My responsibility was to get the best performance out of everybody.
Yeah.
So then going into teaching and then later going into coaching was a pretty logical move that way, for sure. Also, my father, when I was discussing my future with him, he said that something that still sticks with me. I actually write about it on my site. He said you might get a different kind of satisfaction working with one talent for a longer period of time than you do working with 20, 30, 60, 80 people in a day. And he was
Yeah.
right.
And I
He was
loved
absolutely,
because on your
absolutely.
website you talk about pivoting, like doing the same thing for so long, you can love something but still want something more, huh?
It was only after I left that I really understood. I began to read that you kind of, at a certain point, if you're fortunate, you get to an age where you can still make a choice, that you may not necessarily be stuck only doing that thing. And you kind of have to choose to either double down, to be where you are, or maybe you can change. And it was actually the a woman named Susan Rogers who cut her teeth actually recording for Prince when she was very young. She was like in her early 20s. And then at a certain point, Prince would basically wear out his engineers because he would have his engineers on call 20 hours a day, 360 days a year. And so you basically worked with him for like 3 to 5 years, and then you were just bone crushed, exhausted, and said, I can't do it.
I was watching a video last night from an engineer that worked with Prince. This is the weirdest synchronicity. So you were working with her then?
I was, what do you call it? I saw an interview with her after I had made my decision to go. And one of her comments was her decision to leave music came for a couple of different reasons, not the least of which she didn't have a family. She didn't have, I think she was married, but she said that she could make that decision and to go and pivot because she said the little voice in the back of her head, right, kept saying science, science, science.
Science?
And yeah. And so she began to look into it and said, what if I pivoted away from audio production? What if I pivoted away from music production? What if I pivot away from that and really went into studying acoustics, really into the biochemistry around the way that we as humans are affected by sound and music? And so she looked into it and she said she didn't have the time to really get a PhD, but a master's degree she could. And to be able to apply that master's degree, she could. So she made the decision to bail. She bailed on the whole music industry and she's like, peace out. And then off she goes and studies, science and, the deep parts of science. And then interestingly, now she's actually teaching the bioeffects of sound and music at Berkeley.
That's really interesting.
So when I read that, I had a certain identification with it where I began to say, right, I began to feel those things. And then it's like, okay, well, there's like a handshake around what I do now professionally from where I was before, obviously. But it's certainly not a one-to-one transfer because there were a whole set of skills that I had to learn and develop in order to even begin to be successful at this. And pandemic happening not long after I left didn't help things for me. It's a bad time to start any endeavor like that. But I've begun to learn about, marketing and then about, writing more. And I'd written before, but there's a big difference when you're trying to learn to market yourself and then managing a business and then running live events and then all of those kinds of things. And then getting on the conference circuit. And then what does that mean to be out? And then what's the best way to put myself in front of people? There was a very steep learning curve that I was glad that so many of my skills transferred, but it wasn't the immediate handshake that I had expected. And I'm still learning constantly.
Did you enjoy it?
Because I'm interested in taking it seriously.
Did you enjoy those things? Because I find some of us find the other aspects of the business challenging, like the marketing.
I think the marketing parts are challenging because of the dailiness of it and because of certain routine aspects of it and just that feeling like you're kind of shouting into a well and you don't know exactly what's going on. So when you're saying to me, I loved reading what you write on LinkedIn, I'm very, very gratified at that for sure. Fortunately, the voiceover community is very generous of spirit and they have responded very, very well and very openly to what I've put out and shared, and I'm extremely grateful for that as well. And they're unashamedly willing to go, oh, there's a new guy, but he's got something to say. Let me lean into that. And then one by one, things began to happen for sure, But at first, yeah, I was really intimidated.
But being a director is a very well-respected position. I mean, you were never a new guy in being a coach because you've got gravitas.
True. However, there's what do you call it? it's like Kevin Kelly said in the 2000s, the late 90s, 2000s. Excuse me, I have a cold, folks. Sorry about that. He said the biggest problem isn't piracy online. That's not quite so true now. At the time, the biggest problem wasn't piracy. He said it's obscurity.
Mm.
I thought that was very interesting. Now we have 25 years on, we have different problems where there's an oversaturation, and also there are these, the AI machines are sucking up what we're doing constantly and turning it into other things without our permission.
Yeah.
So that's something that not even Kelly could have seen 25 years ago. So what I first began to face was just obscurity.
So
That was difficult to overcome.
how did you drill down to the niche conversational VO? When
I
did
had the
that
temerity
happen?
I had this just the straight up and down temerity to ask people very directly, what are you looking for in a coach? And then they would pause, and then they would say, I've never really been able to land the conversational read. I have, succeeded in medical narration, or I have succeeded in e-learning, or I have succeeded, and they've said to me, I make a very good living at these, but I've never landed the conversational read. Can you help me with that?
But can I
And
ask,
I'm like,
how is that
and I'm like,
I don't understand, because we're all conversational in real life. I don't understand. It would seem to me that would be the simplest. This is showing my inexperience in voiceover, because
mhm,
I
okay,
did it randomly. And the minute I found I could get audiobooks, I think a lot of people gravitate. So my inexperience, the business side of voiceover freaks me out, because I find that there's more hustle. Whereas an audiobook, if I book one audiobook, I've got a week worth of not having to worry. I'm in the booth. With VO,
nice,
it's 15 minutes.
nice.
And
Mm-hmm.
and you also have constant contact with the client asking, can you
Right.
do it this way? Can you? And after the third time, I'm like, I did it the best way. So I'm better with
Well,
an audiobook. I'm
to
better in
the
general.
okay, to your latter point, right? The
Yes.
point that you just made, I I am fascinated by how every individual's business model is completely different.
Wow, yeah.
And then I tapped into a need that has flummoxed all sides of the industry. When they just simply said, "Can you help with this?" And to me, because I had worked with actors and very good ones for a long time, I didn't know. My naivete when I first came into the industry really was that I didn't understand that I was walking into a scenario where I was seeing the cream of New York voiceover at the last great crest in
Oh,
2006,
that's
where I was just
amazing.
experiencing it. I was seeing the best of the old guard who were still doing it. I was seeing the young lions coming up as they were beginning to mint the occasional millionaire that way.
Are you going to
I
write a book about it?
I've actually drafted as part of an introduction to one of my quote books that I drafted during the pandemic, an essay talking about a bit of it.
But why do you say quote books? Why do you not?
Because books are a bitch, and it's Kim is laughing, but it's true. If you're going to sit down and really take a book seriously,
Yeah.
it is such a wildly labor intensive practice that you have to really, really commit to it completely. And for my business model, I think sometimes I'm better served taking the 20,000 words I drafted during the pandemic, which are a draft and not a book, they're a draft material, and then parsing those out into 500-word chunks and beginning to populate that on the internet in order to serve my professional needs.
Right.
Although my consultant has said you could do a book,
You
and my
could wrap
father
those
has
words up after you've parsed them out on the
to,
internet,
to which my father has also said, I wouldn't mind seeing you write a book.
because you're a writer. You're a
And I'm like,
writer.
pressure.
You
If
are a
you
writer. You're
if you were if you talk to my high school English teachers, they would guffaw.
no, but you see, all that from dealing with so many writers, I talk to so many writers, some that end up working with, some that I don't end up working with. And there's a lot of noise. And I hope you don't mind, because I tend to be too candid at times. But some of those things that you're thinking
Mhm.
is noise. It's you've already written it. It's I think that we have this image of what a book and a writer is, and whereas if you looked at your stuff from an outside eye, I bet it's closer to being a book than you think it is.
Well, that was one thing I started to do during the winter break. I began to look at my old material, and I actually had an editor go in and polish it a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And as I was rereading it, I was sitting there going, yeah, this isn't anywhere near finished, but it's really in an interestingly better state than I had expected. And I remember one friend of mine who just finished writing her book. I asked her at one point when we were co-writing, right? We would turn on Zoom, right? She would work on her manuscript, I would work on my manuscript.
Oh,
And we
body
did this.
doubling, I think they call it.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes called that. Yeah. We did this during the pandemic. And she just finished her. I haven't spoken to her for a long time. I would ask her though, do you remember what you write? And she said, sometimes I don't. And I was like, yeah, I don't either sometimes, because sometimes it's just so much of it.
It needs to be a book. I'm just saying, just all it's not as hard as we build things. It's just a decision. You've already got this. It needs to be a book. I would buy it in a split second, especially if you made me feel like I was at that crest in New York when the actors and the change. I would love that. All of us would love that.
That's interesting. What do you call it? Because I did draft an essay just specifically about that. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
So okay, so we've settled that. You're gonna publish your book very soon.
Uh,
So let's
gee.
move on to so where you are right now.
I'm
I'm
in
gonna
Queens, New York.
no, I'm gonna fast forward to like your kind of daily life right now. What does it look
Okay.
like the
I'm in
percentage
Queens,
of
New
it?
York.
I mean, aside from having a cold and everything, was it like, do you meet like 3 clients a day, have a nice cup of coffee, walk the dog? What's your life like now being a coach in New York City?
I don't have a dog. I have a tiny studio apartment in a lovely neighborhood very close to Manhattan called Sunnyside. I love it here. It's great. My place is conspicuously small. This is an IKEA screen, so it's actually a real screen, and people think that I'm kind of in a studio environment that way. My calendar right now is not as full as I would like it to be, but it's actually pretty good, insofar as the number of billable hours that I have going on. I also have standing appointments with some folks that have bartered their experience with me about the voiceover industry in particular. So those are me doing one-for-one with them. I also have a consultant that I meet with twice a week in order to um, build my free event series that was very successful in the fall. And
Do
I
you
see my
direct
therapist.
audiobooks? Do you direct audiobooks? Are you open for that for the
But
purpose of a lot of people that are going to be in this audience?
I'm very interested in directing audiobooks because it's very interesting. Having directed as much as I have, I've also recognized that there's a difference between directing and coaching. And because I've worked a lot with actors who specifically do voiceovers, I understand how to direct. So, but I would never coach an audiobook, for
Okay,
example.
so I'm going to put everyone, in case you're interested after the call, I'm going to put Hugh's website in the comments below in case you ever have that special book that you really, really, really want to master, or the audition that like you want to be above, I I've never worked with Hugh, but I have heard since I announced that I was doing the call for you, I've had some narrators go, wow. So you're well respected
Thank
amongst
you.
narrators,
Thank you.
and that goes for a lot in this industry.
I'd like to be working on the various parts of my business with more consistency. I'd like to be publishing more consistently. I'd like to be marketing more consistently. And I'd like to understand how to do that. I'd like to understand a way to do that for myself so I don't feel so overwhelmed. I appreciate that people like my work. I appreciate that people want to show up when I have free events in the calendar. I just dropped the one for January 15th that is in place now. And the attendance on those has really exceeded all of my expectations. I've just been wonderfully surprised at that.
Tell me,
And
since we're here right now, because I was going to ask about it later, but since we're here right now, can you tell me what they're like, what the events
sure,
are?
sure. I call it the open studio. I call it the conversational VO open studio. In the nutshell, which is very difficult for me to get to all the time, because why use 4 words when 25 words?
Billion.
Now I'm stuck trying to think of it, the nutshell. People get to log into a Zoom call and watch me coach somebody for about 30 minutes.
Okay.
Live coaching as opposed to simply critique, as opposed to simply comments or something like that. It stems out of a specific part of the music conservatory tradition, often called open studio, where, let's say, the head of the piano division would invite weekly, even daily, some places, all of her students into a room, and then she would coach one person, and then everybody would get to observe that coaching. And I began to think about that, and I began to say to myself, what would that look like in voiceover? What would that look like? And then suddenly, I realized if I made the point of saying, okay, you're going to actually see coaching, which means it's going to be messy, which means it's going to be very specific, which means might be even a little esoteric, depending on what you're seeing and what I'm dealing with people. But actual real coaching, it would be a very, very different pedagogical experience for the people observing, and also an opportunity for people to be exposed to the way that I do the work as well.
Smart. Yeah.
But I really want it to be a learning experience for everybody attending. And the fascinating thing to me is when people have come and spoken to me about it, what they get out of it individually is completely different, one person to the other. And I found that to be intensely fascinating.
Yeah.
That some people have explicitly said, it was great to watch this person make mistakes because I felt comforted. And other people say, yeah, that moment where she got in there, and then suddenly when you said change the scenario of the backstory, and suddenly her eyes lit up, I was all about that, watching, the power of the direction that way in the moment. Or, any kind of thing that way, everybody has a different reaction to it. And I find that to be just intensely interesting, because I wasn't exactly sure. I loved the idea, but I wasn't sure exactly what an audience would get out of it. But then to have it be so well received and so consistently received, and having so many people get so many different things, I was like, okay, yeah. Some people, for sure, they were coming to see Natasha Marchevka, get coached, or Bev Standing get coached. Sure, because they have cachet, they have name, in the industry, and they want to come see, oh, I've heard the world about Bev Standing. Let me go see what Bev's like to get coached. And so suddenly the Zoom call was filled with her students, for example. Right. So there was that, which is an entirely different motivation to show up, or something like that. Right.
Why do
But
people do that, though?
interesting.
Do people show up just because of a name, or do you think they show up because they admire the person's work?
Some people have said to me, Hugh, remember, they're coming to see you. And I've sat there and gone, I don't know. I don't know about that. And other people I know have explicitly come just to see this person do the thing that way. Yeah. So I think some of them, as it's beginning to build an identity, people are starting to get more out of it, specifically saying, oh, I want to see who the next person is.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So how often do you do them?
I did it 7 times in the fall, from fall to winter. And I'm hoping to do it. The first one is the 15th, but I may have to change that because, like I said, I've been behind with everything. And
I'm beginning to see where your problem with fitting everything in might be occurring.
Maybe a little, but at the same time, I do feel like that there needs to be more, or at the very least, more consistency.
Yeah.
Where I have to figure out the scales of things differently. And the,
I'm right there with you, Hugh. I've got to tell you, I was going to say struggle. My whole point of being alive in 2025 is to finally build consistency and do those little, like, the hygiene things, like a little bit of budgeting, a little bit of marketing, all those things, as opposed to wake up, drink 6 espressos, drag my sorry poor old body into the booth, and then come out bleary-eyed at 9 o'clock at night. It's like, hello.
I think that, and I have difficulty doing this too, a lot of difficulty. I have difficulty reminding myself that one size does not fit all.
Yeah.
And I've learned that from my students, where more than once I've said to myself, well, Hugh, you don't treat every single student the same way. That's just not interesting and it's not useful. Why are you so slavishly adhering to the idea that, oh, you must do it this way because it was taught to you that way? Why aren't you as flexible with yourself as you are with your students? And then that's been like, a growth point for me.
But right there, what you just said, that's the kind of thing he writes about, guys. Like, that is, I think, and this is what I've been wanting to scream from the rooftop in all these calls. That is the key to being successful at any of our jobs, is to keep that mindset, questioning yourself and investigating. You investigate, you carefully consider yourself.
Yeah, it's like Miles said about the later parts of his career, where he was really kind of not interested in interested in the fact that there was a whole massive groups of people that just abhorred the direction he went in. And his attitude was, if you don't want to come, don't.
Yeah.
Right? He said, you take what you like and you leave what you don't. Right? He said and he actually said this in an interview, you take what you like and you leave what you don't. It's like food. And the interviewer just like practically choked on their own tongue, right? Just sitting there going, and what? And he said, it's like food. You take what you like, you leave what you don't. You don't like the next thing that I'm doing. Okay, maybe you'll like the next one after that.
Yeah.
Maybe. And so when we look at ourselves in relationship to the work, right? And especially even like in the business space, I've started to realize that, and even in the voiceover coaching space, as I've watched other coaches coach in workshops and things like that, I kind of realized that the better ones are talking about similar ideas. We're just talking about them in different ways. And so I always maintain, in order to have a good relationship with a coach, you really need to see them do their thing. And then when you see them do their thing, it becomes, will that resonate well with me? Because the ideas are not quite interchangeable, but kind of close.
Yeah. Yeah.
One student of mine said, yeah, when you get to the top and you get to the vista, the view doesn't change. And I said to him, yeah, but everybody gets to the top in a different way. That's the challenge. And he's like,
most of them don't even realize they're at the top when they're at the top, do they?
To which he said, but you get my point, Hugh. Yeah. I'm like, of course I get your point, man, but it's the on the way that shapes us.
Yeah.
Right. But when we get to the top, then suddenly it's like, oh, right, we're all talking about this many similar things. Right. But that doesn't make the trek any less hard.
But I think the thing is that we forget is we still bring ourselves with us. We're the same person, unless you do what you just did and question, do I need to coach every student the same? Am I challenging yourself every step of the way, no matter how much experience you have? We get to the top, the same exact person we were at the bottom. And what is it they say about lottery winners? They win the lottery and they lose it.
You bring your damage with you when you win the lottery, right? Yeah. And then suddenly you just have more ways to, kind of, hurt yourself when you win, because you've got money to do it, And as they say, that's why so many of them people go broke after they win the lottery and the whole thing.
And they didn't earn it.
I personally would love the opportunity to
I would too. I would be different.
I think I'd be quite good at going broke.
I would too. I'd be a great rich person.
Yeah, I think I'd be very, very good at it. Let me know what that's like. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I love that. Okay, okay. Says the girl that consistently pushes money away and in conversations when she should negotiate up, actually negotiates herself down. I've got the I'm an artist for the love of the work mentality, which I'm trying to like beat out of my head because it's not any good.
I
So
get that.
I want to ask you,
I'll
yeah,
try.
Kim says consistency in marketing thing keeps coming up on these calls. Um, Knowing you wants to get better at it, it gives me hope that I can too. See, yep, that's and you are a master. Like for me to notice you on LinkedIn, I've got to tell you because I am not the audience there. And okay, you work with actors, you work with voiceover people,
Yeah.
even just in directing, not far back as far as directing.
Okay.
Is there anything consistent that you noticed people doing when you would get in the booth to direct them that you were always catching something that we could all learn from, or is it just a we're fragile egos and get in our own way with our insecurity, or is there any
Can you
advice you
drill?
can give?
Can you drill down on that when you're saying anything I'm noticing? Are you talking about performance? Are you talking about work ethic? Or what exactly
I'm
are you talking
talking
about specific
performance.
in performance?
Yeah. You don't want to get me started on work ethic because
I find that, well, I mean, if you want to get really technical,
yeah.
um, I really love, and this, I never thought about it, but I guess this is an outgrowth of me asking that very informative question, or at least the question informed me when I said, "What are you looking for in a coach?" And so many people said conversational. Then I began to do something about it. You almost can't take a workshop with me without me putting in front of people a survey where I usually will just ask them like one question. And very often the question is something like, if you could snap your fingers and change one thing about your conversational read, what would it be?
What problems do people have with conversational read? I don't understand.
People have certain tendencies to make the it's let me try to say this succinctly. It's very difficult to take unnaturally written words and to make them sound completely natural and organic, as if you were just saying them off the top of your head in a
Ah,
genuine way. Because unlike audiobooks and other kinds of narration, those words are designed to live in the mind of the reader and the author, which is very different than voiceover, which is designed to be experienced in real time. No takebacks. So voiceover writing doesn't change because it's extraordinarily utilitarian. Now, I don't say this to be as in any way a pejorative, not at all. But the request constantly has become, we've got to make this sound as natural as possible, despite the fact that it's written the way commercials have been written for over a century at this point. Why? Because commercials are written to be heard once and understood immediately with no takebacks. Hence, there's structures around the way brands are in there, the way that triptychs are used, the way that comparison and contrast, all of those things get in the way of reading them naturally. And then to also imbue in them an emotionality that makes sense to both the person listening as well as to the performer. Because if you don't understand it, you can't execute it.
can I ask you something? Because Colin made a comment. Now, Colin's a Shakespearean actor, so I mean, he's on a whole other level than like most actors out there
Is
today. I
this the
mean,
moment I get to what do you call it, reprise my use of the Ian McKellen quote?
yeah, yeah, Colin's like the expert at this, but he does have a very good point. He says those are the skills that an actor has. I mean,
Right.
shouldn't anyone trained in acting be able to deal with that easily?
Yes and no, because if you think about the context of a script concept, you have a tremendous amount of ideas both direct and implied, for an actor to build off of. You have character, you have conflict, you have
Oh,
narrative.
okay. Okay.
Then you also have costuming, lighting, set, all of those things that deeply inform direction, that deeply inform what an actor does. In voiceover, we don't get that. So a lot of voice actors fall into what they perceive as the cliches of the commercial sound. It's very difficult to emotionally relate to selling soap. It's
Yeah.
a drag.
It's like when
Right.
radio people first come into audiobooks. I don't know if Kim did that, but type in the comments if you did this. But this famous, a lot of radio people bring radio voice when they
Yeah.
first start narrating
And
audiobooks.
a number of people that come to me, have radio voice, and they come to me to try to get that out of them. And the first things I have to teach them how to do is slow down, think about it, and then get in touch with a couple of emotions. Because they've spent their entire careers presenting an idea with an emphasis on clarity and communication, as opposed to interpreting an idea from an emotional point of view. But to me, it goes back to what Ian McKellen said. There's a great 1979 workshop video of him on YouTube. I've quoted this ad nauseum.
Oh, okay.
And I don't
Let's
care.
hear the Ian McKellen quote.
Ian McKellen, at the very beginning of this workshop, directly says, I trust, if nothing else, this workshop has scotched the idea that Shakespeare's verse is music, and once you find the melody, everything will be all right. Rather, I believe, he says, once you find the sense of the words, their sounds will look after themselves. And then I stopped the playback and I said, that's everything I want to say about voiceover. That's every single thing I want to say about voiceover. And that guy said it 45 years ago as practically an offhand comment.
That
and I'm
makes
like,
that makes me think about audiobook narrating. I'm sorry, but that makes me think about, because people talk about accents and they study dialects and they go in the booth and they pay tribute to the technicalities of each accent, each dialect. And in my head, it feels like once
they're not acting.
once you're in the character,
Right.
it takes care of it's the script takes care of itself. The words take care of themselves.
But you have an audiobook to build with.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
which is
completely
probably
different.
why I like audiobooks.
It's completely different than trying to voice a 30-second commercial.
Yeah.
Now, I coach through commercial because it has the greatest variety of kinds of work, because every single commercial is a problem to be solved in and unto itself. I think the conversational read is a read of interpretation. So you have to constantly be reinterpreting every single script in a completely different way, because you have to take it on its own terms. They're all problems to be solved, ideas that have to be picked apart. And so in turn, you have to look at them and really understand what's going on. Right now, you looking at an audiobook, for example, once you understand it, you sustain that comprehension for a full week.
Yeah.
This is somebody getting in there and really understanding something for a couple of minutes, and then they have to relate to it, do it, drop it, and move on.
Yeah.
That was one of the fascinating things about watching so many actors do the work. Again, 2006, because they all approached it differently. They all had different points of view on it. And people would ask me, don't you get tired of hearing the same words over and over again? To which I would say, I don't, because I'm very interested in what every single individual actor is doing with those words. And once I put my attention there, then it's endlessly fascinating. If I stop paying attention to that, it's exhausting.
But what that skill, right? That skill alone, dealing with every single, so you're talking of voiceover jobs, maybe like a page full of script.
Or even, like in, what, 8 lines.
Yeah. And that skill, though, of immediately analyzing it, getting it, that could be a superpower for auditions.
I teach that.
Yeah, that could be something. I keep going back to audiobook narrators because it's my love language, but that could be something.
That's a big part of what I teach. I mean, I teach prosody. I teach, how do you create a narrative where no narrative exists? I teach, commercial structure and how that informs the conversational read. That's roughly it, and then all the tweaking that's involved in there is directly applied to the needs of the individual student. The worst thing I ever did was with a radio guy, I overloaded him and I gave him just too many things to think about. And he didn't quite run screaming, but at the same time, I began to also recognize that, you know what? I could have handled that a little bit differently. I could have been in there coaching his sound for, let's say, 4 weeks, as opposed to me saying, okay, here's sound, here's how to generate subtext, here's how to create pre-life, here's structure, here are all these things. Now we're going to read. And I don't do that so much anymore. I pay very close attention to the way that people are receiving what I'm discussing with them. And from there, I make decisions about what's the best way for me to communicate this information to them.
Because it goes back to what you said earlier, doesn't it? It's they're all different, and you've got to meet them where they are. Some people,
and it was kind of naive of me to think otherwise. Yeah,
and sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but I wanted, because this is a perfect time to say Colin made a comment that was really relevant to exactly this. He said regarding the McKellen quote, there's the thing that isn't taken into account is that McKellen already had the necessary training and skills before getting to that point.
Right.
So a lot of actors you see aren't going to have the and then I'm going to interject this, since I've already interrupted you, to save me embarrassing myself twice. James has a question. He says, have you ever run into a situation where a voice actor was simply undirectable?
I don't really know exactly what undirectable means. So I guess the short answer is no. Do some voice actors take to me and what I teach more so than others? Yes, of course, for sure, because I'm human. But undirectable, yeah, I guess so, where there have just been these moments where I'm just like, I do remember one. I'm trying to think of a way to tell this story without divulging,
giving away who it is.
No, not who they are, but they were a second generation voice actor.
Okay.
And I had worked extensively with their parent. And the kid was talented. He was a young adult, but he couldn't take direction. And I've never told this story, but I'll tell it. And I looked at his parent when the father said, "How's it going?" And I said, "Okay, I'll tell you the truth. I don't think he's capable of taking direction, but let me spell this out very clearly," I said to the parent. "It's not that he's resisting my direction. And it's not that he doesn't understand what I'm saying. I just don't think he's capable of applying it. That's the impression that I'm getting. I just don't think he's capable of applying it."
What did the father
And he looked at me, and I said, and you know what, man, I'm going to say those sentences to you exactly again because it's the truth, and I don't know how you're going to take that. And he looked at me and he said, "No, I trust you." And I said, "Okay." And then he said, "Okay, what do you do about that?" I looked at him and said, "I don't know. I'm not sure."
Because that was very difficult. The father, there's a good chance he already suspected what you said and just wasn't sure.
Oh, no. No, he took it real well. He took it real well and took it as a problem to be solved, for sure. He didn't take it personally, and he didn't get indignant about it or anything like that, right? But that was one of the very rare occasions where it's like, like if I give somebody a holistic direction, I think that like direction, there are two flavors of direction, really, right? There are like holistic direction, and then there are like granular direction, right? Don't hit that word. That's a granular direction, right? Don't do that thing, right? A holistic direction is something like warmer.
I'm better with holistic than granular.
So then that becomes something that is really like, then like, what does that mean? Well, then you have to do a thing, and then you interpret that, and then the actor interprets that, and then that becomes a thing, right? But there's so much space in there to open that, to express and be interpretive of that conceit, which is very different than don't move until you've finished your last line.
Yeah, I've always been very, very good at the holistic direction. I instinctually know
Right.
what they want and can pick it
I
up
don't,
fast.
and I
But
don't think this person's kid could really take a holistic direction, I think.
the granular one is hard. I freeze when it's don't. I start thinking about that one word I'm not supposed to say that way, and I freeze.
Well, that's what, then in that moment is where you kind of got to go into that Zen place where it becomes, I understand what it is. Now I have to trust myself. I'm not going to do it.
Ah, yeah. I wish I'd known
Whole
that.
books have been written around that notion, that treatise.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
One of them is, what do you call it? The Inner Game of Tennis by Tim Galloway.
Oh, I'm going to check it out. Thank you. I'll see if there's an audiobook.
Might be. There have been lots of variations on Inner Game, right? Tennis is the good one, though.
So, question. So, what happened to him? It was this.
I think he basically wound up going back to school, and I don't know that he pursued the voiceover thing that much.
Sorry, Hugh.
Yeah.
Okay, so did you hear Colin's question about
A
motivation?
little bit, yeah, about motivation, yeah.
Yeah, what would you do? What do you do in those circumstances?
I would drill down and try to get as specific as possible in order to understand why he feels unmotivated. And then I would ask about that circumstance, because all he mentioned was having a pension, for example.
Yeah.
And then there's a certain cushion to that. And then it becomes, there could be the implication, and I don't know, Colin, but it's like, it becomes like necessity is the mother of invention at times, right? Where it becomes, well, if I don't have something else, well, I could still fall back on my pension. And that can be a motivator, because it can sit there and say, okay, I can now go into this thing where the work is a little bit more inconsistent, but I can begin to build that to supplement, knowing, with the confidence of knowing that my essentials are taken care of. Or it could be something that becomes, well, I don't have to do it because I know my essentials are taken care of.
And it's cold,
So,
and I'm cold and miserable,
it
so
is
it's not a
cold.
pleasant
Exactly.
experience.
So the question then becomes, right, because that was the only thing that he said. So the question then becomes, goes back to my first question around of why do you think or feel or are unmotivated? Where does that come from? And the more honest that you are with yourself around that, then becomes something that in turn can be worked with or worked through.
And
Because
also action breeds excitement, motivation. But if you're not taking the action, but if you maybe take small actions, it would
there are so many different ways of individually interpreting circumstances.
Yeah.
That it becomes only an answer that you can provide for yourself. And sometimes you have to look at different narratives and begin to see, oh, I see myself in that narrative.
I don't think the answer is because I am a lazy SOB. I don't think it's ever that simple.
Then I would ask the question, where does that come from? Why do you think that? What is it about yourself that makes you feel that way? Like, it's very interesting to know that I'm reading a great book right now on growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And I went so far as to, I can't remember what it's called. And I actually went so far as to look up to see if there were scientific papers on this in order to really understand if this was just a metaphor or if this was a real thing, documentable, double-blind experience. Turns out it is a real thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is.
So the interesting things that resonated with me were the idea of my own problems with discipline, right? That Discipline for somebody with a fixed mindset means this. Discipline for somebody with a growth mindset means this. And I was fascinated to know that that it was not, the problem was not discipline itself, but the prism through which you were seeing discipline. That a person who was challenged by the work, right, who had a growth mindset, saw discipline as an opportunity, as opposed to somebody with a fixed mindset who could see discipline as a punishment. And I thought that that was intensely interesting, that it was about the prism through which we saw our lives, or at least the decisions around these things, was the thing that was directly affecting whether or not we were going towards something or tending to step away from it. And I'd never encountered that before.
And the stories we tell ourselves about the thing we're about to do. But you can
That's right.
change. We
That's right.
change at different parts of life, don't we? I mean, you could be completely.
If you recognize, and the big thing in order to change that kind of mindset is to recognize where it's coming from, or to recognize this in yourself, and then to say, oh, I see that now. This is stemming from my, for lack of a better term, fixed mindset. So let me talk about it that way. The author actually goes very specifically into sports examples where I had the impression it was written by a woman, but I think it's actually written by a guy. And
it's a famous, there's a famous book that is written by a woman, Growth Mindset, Fixed Mindset. I can't remember her name.
The author said, can you imagine that at one point golf was considered a sport that you could not practice, and that people were looked down upon for actually practicing to play golf? And they actually wrote those words in the text, and then proceeded to unpack all of the things around, the growth that went on for the superluminaries in golf. I think she talked about Tiger Woods, of course, talked about all the discipline that went into it and everything, but to recognize that at a certain point in certain sport, it was considered not the thing to do to actually practice the sport, that you had the gift or you did not. And I just found that to be just intensely interesting. And then they went further to unpack it and say, so many people think that despite the thousands and thousands of hours that professional athletes put in, they want to fall back on the idea that it's innate. But all the evidence bears out that it's not. So where does that come from? The author asks the question. Where does that predisposition we have towards believing it's simply talent? And then they posit the idea of seeing it through the prism of fixed mindset and observing it, as opposed to seeing it through the prism of growth mindset and observing it. And I was just like, I just felt my brain explode. And I was like, my God, how intensely interesting. The fact that we're observing a phenomenon, and the prism through which we're actually observing the phenomenon, let alone experiencing the phenomenon, directly determines the way that we see it, and then in turn are applying it to ourselves.
Well,
so I drill down, Colin, around any of those kinds of ideas to say, where are those things coming from? What is it about those things that make sense to you? And then if they were my student, for example, and just specifically discussing voiceover technique, it would become, let me see how I can convey the things that I think that they need to learn in a way that makes the most sense for them. For example, because that's my bailiwick, right? I mean, so far as getting up and doing the work and all that, I don't know that I could specifically address that.
But you could also look for, because don't you think that creative people sometimes just need the spark? And if situation is if it's bleak, if it's cold, if you've been doing something for a long time and you don't need to worry about paying the rent with it, what if you found the spark somewhere else? What if we're creatives, pick up a guitar, write a book. I mean, find anything to get the muse back.
And anything. I think that could be the best prescription for the right person. People ask me, how can you direct? My answer is, I've done it a lot.
Do you still direct as well as coach sometimes?
Not very much. Coaching is different. I'm very explicit where I say there is coaching and there is directing. And sadly, some coaches think they're coaching when they're actually just directing. Coaching is a lot more about the how, and direction is about the what, right? when you're directing, you can have a tremendous indifference where it becomes, don't do that. And you don't have to explain yourself. Right? You could just say, do it or don't do it. Right. And people just do as they are told that way. Right. I needed to be faster. No whys. There's why is a non-issue at that
We don't
moment.
have
Right.
time.
And that's a lot of what direction is and must be sometimes, especially when the waiting room is filled with 40 people behind you. Right. Right. But that's not coaching.
I have a question about coaching.
Coaching is about the how, and then in turn, if I may, it's about the how, but it's also I coach always with the intention of having my students fire me, because you've got to be able to do this on your own.
Okay, this brings me to my question. I had somebody
Great.
tell
Hit it.
me that if you're hiring a coach, the coach's job is to find what needs to be fixed to help you fix it. But
Yeah.
what if what they think needs to be fixed doesn't need to be fixed? Do you see what I'm saying? Is there a worry of how do you address something to not chip away at what they're already doing well?
Yeah.
There's always something that needs to be fixed, I'm assuming, but can you not
Yeah.
make something worse if you by like nitpicking to find the thing
Sure.
that needs to be fixed?
Yeah, and then you need to fire that coach sooner than later and go get yourself a different coach. You may actually need to ask for your money back. If you're, what do you call it, that if you're early enough in the process, and that's where you're at with it. Is that a concern on my part? Yes, absolutely. Is that why I really pay attention to the way that people do the work? You betcha. Absolutely. Is that why I sit there and I'm constantly listening to how people are responding to what I'm doing? Yes, absolutely. I have a lot of experience, so I think more than, I don't know, if you made me put a number on it, 90+% of the time, I'm not making people worse.
You know,
But
and
at the same time,
to be fair, I've never had a coach do that to me, but I have
yeah,
heard somebody say it the other
sure.
day.
Yeah, there have been moments, and because I have a music background, I have had good coaches, good teachers, and bad teachers, and I do know that some of my bad teachers really messed me up. I know that, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it was interesting because other pupils that they worked with succeeded. And I would actually hear later that one coach who worked with me became frustrated because another teacher at the same school was succeeding with me, to which he was frustrated, saying, I don't get it. He couldn't do anything for me.
That's
To
it's
which that other teacher's attitude was, I don't know, man.
yeah. And I think we all find our camp, whether it's in between or so. I've got one last question for you, Hugh. You've
Okay.
been so kind coming on anyway on this call. This has been just so much. Kim says, I highly recommend the movie Whiplash. Teacher trying to elevate performance,
Oh.
absolutely crushing some students. Ooh, I'll watch that. Thank you, Kim. Okay.
I found that what do you call it, soul crushing to watch.
Really? Is it? I'm gonna watch it. I've not seen it. I've not seen it. Yeah, I can't see. I think you'd be an amazing coach. I've learned a lot from you just in this phone call. Okay. We're going to post all of Hugh's links below, but I'm going to hit you with the one final question.
All right, hit it.
If anybody watched this call and they took nothing else away from it but this one thing, what one piece of advice, people watching this on YouTube in 100 years, would you like to leave them with? No pressure.
I would say, well, thinking about it, I don't think I'm going to say this uh, very elegantly. Uh, there is a way. There's always a way. And I think that the effort and your energy needs to be focused on you finding the way that works for you. But I think that you shouldn't give up, that if you haven't found that way for yourself yet, you have to trust that you can find that way that will work for you. Doesn't mean that it's easy. But if I was going to carve something into a stone and drop it to the bottom of the sea, I would think that that might be one sentiment I would want to leave behind.
I love that. Trust that there's a right way for you.
I don't even like the word right. To trust that there is a way for you.
Trust that there is a way. You're right, because right implies shouldn't.
Yeah, exactly.
Trust that
Exactly.
there's a way for you.
Trust that there is a way for you.
I love that. I do. Hugh, it has been an honor. I knew you were my people the minute I read your writing, and I've enjoyed every single second of this. And thank you so much for coming on the show, even though you were deathly ill, and you came on and you
Struggling. Thank you.
and it couldn't tell though. Wonderful call. And thank you very, very much. And thank you guys for joining the call. It's been amazing. You're all wonderful. Mwah! I'll see you on the other side. Bye, everyone. Check the links if you're watching this later to see if where you can find out about Hugh's open studio.
Open studio, yeah. And
Okay.
online.
Open studio online. Bye, everyone. Yeah. Bye. Bye. Feel better. And I can't find the end button. Bye.